I'm becoming increasingly aware that I don't want to have regrets in life. Have you any ideas as to how I can make sure this isn't an issue? So the presence of regrets in and of themselves doesn't need to be a problem. And regrets, I suppose, can be of two main types. I suppose typical true regrets where you are actually regretfully looking back on the past and feeling bad about something that happened. But the other type is a kind of a proactive regretting, which is where you're looking forward and you're thinking about what might go wrong or what you might lose out on. Now, of course, at first glance, because regretting is typically uncomfortable by definition, it can seem therefore to be a bad thing and something we want to avoid. And there are definitely times when that is the case, and maybe it isn't too useful, or at least the quantity of it isn't useful. We're just spending too much time lingering on something which maybe isn't that helpful. But regretting, other than those disadvantages, can be an important learning tool. And again, that learning can go in either direction, because you can look back and regret something, but as a result of that, another way of saying you regret something looking back is that you are wiser now and that you have maybe a different perception of that same situation. And hopefully that can be cashed out today in terms of thinking or feeling or acting differently. So there can be real value to that. And if it is the proactive type of regretting, well, then that also can be really valuable, because that in a sense is even better, because that's really what learning is all about, is hopefully the capacity to not need to make too many mistakes ourselves. If we can learn after 5 mistakes rather than 6, all the better. If we can learn with 1 rather than 5, if we can watch somebody else make a mistake and learn from that, even through history, that's all good stuff, because it's going to save us a bit of wear and tear when it comes to learning. But it doesn't really matter. It takes as long as it takes. The main point is to not let it take any longer than it needs to take. So therefore, if you have the ability to visualize what could go wrong, that, as I say, could be negative if the moment is the wrong moment, or if the quantity of that thinking is involving you just getting trapped or caught in a negative spiral. But if what you're able to do is think ahead for a moment and think, okay, well, what could go wrong in advance, and not spend terribly long on that, but be informed by it. Well, as they say, forewarned is forearmed, so you're in a stronger position then as a result. So that's something that could actually be really useful. So you can regret things you've done. You can also regret things you haven't done. And that, I think, is an interesting point with regret, because when you recognize that, that helps us, I suppose, get out of this illusion that it's possible to play it safe in life. Typically when we're fearful of certain outcomes, certain things from the past being repeated, or we're looking back on something that we're not happy with, we tend to want to, if there are things we haven't done, we tend to want to put the foot down on the accelerator and make up for that now. If there are things we have done and they haven't gone well, well, then maybe it's a case of once bitten, twice shy, and then we're reluctant to do those kinds of things. But either of those approaches mightn't be helpful, because they're a bit too binary. They're like the example of driving. You don't just put the foot on the accelerator because you've been a little bit too slow when you're driving in the past. Nor do you just put the foot on the brakes because you've been driving too fast. Either of those could be a good or a bad idea, depending on the situation you're in. So I think what we want instead then, hopefully, is that you're in a position now where you're feeling an awareness that either way you're living in each moment. Action is something, but not doing something is in itself something. That's also a form of action. Choosing to put on the brakes is also a decision that's going to affect your movement down the road. So likewise, choosing to avoid certain things for fear of negative outcomes can be a problem, but also so can needing to do things for fear of not having done those things. So if you recognize that, that can be helpful in a way, because it takes you off the virtual fence that maybe you thought you could be on. Now that at first can be a bit scary, because you're forced to play the game, so to speak. You're forced to make decisions, and you mightn't like that. You might say to yourself, well, I'd rather sit this one out. I'm afraid of the past being repeated or of making the wrong decision. So let me just stand by the sidelines and sit this one out. But don't work that way. You're living right now, and that's great. Again, maybe it's a bit scary to realize it, but it's true, so you might as well realize it. And of course, you still want to make good decisions, but that's the point. It'd be better, I think, to focus on making good decisions rather than the fear of making the wrong decision. Now, it's a bit of a subtle point, but that can be informed by past challenging experience. But the difference is, rather than just playing in a loop what could go wrong, you're taking some learning from what has gone wrong in the case of a real past regret, or potential learning in the case of something that you're thinking ahead that might go wrong. And then you're taking that and you're extracting some learning from it. You're juicing out all the good richness of the education of that experience. And you're saying, okay, but what does that mean today? You know, the purpose of our life isn't to not fail. You know, what does that even mean? To not fail suggests there's something you actually want to begin with. What is that? And what's the best way of going about achieving it? So the simple examples sometimes are useful here with this, because, you know, if you look back to childhood, you could say you regret falling while walking and not walking more quickly and more effectively. So, of course, you really shouldn't regret that at all, because firstly, it's not your fault. But secondly, it's not only not a problem, but it's actually a necessary part of the developmental processes of learning to walk. So you can't bypass it, because what you'll be bypassing is some of the necessary work that's needed. You can't get a super app or a book, and even if you were able to read before you were able to walk, understand that information and therefore get it. Because what you actually need is the movement of the muscles, and even the balancing and the shaking. All of that is training your system, and there isn't really a way of bypassing that. So all of that's extraordinarily helpful. So likewise, a good bit of failure in life is a very, very valuable thing. And there is an argument to say if things are going fabulously, sometimes you're not pushing yourself enough, because a bit of failure can be useful. It's like if you're a software developer. You know, if everything just works perfectly, you're probably not challenging yourself as much as you could. If you don't need to, I suppose, fair enough. But, you know, the point is, pushing the boundaries, seeking to grow, does involve a little bit of discomfort. Now, what we don't want to be doing here, I think, is just looking for discomfort. You know, we don't want to be that kind of an adrenaline junkie addicted to kind of the masochism of pushing ourselves as hard as we can. Again, it's not that some of those feelings are wrong, but they're the secondary point. The primary point is, who the hell am I and what's my life about? Let me move in the direction of what seems meaningful. Let me use my learning and education to help take better steps along that path. And to the degree I need to push myself somewhat to do that's fair enough, then that's welcome. But pushing yourself isn't exactly the point. So yeah, I think if you can shift the attention to living fully and living meaningfully rather than not having regrets, you're going to achieve the same thing anyway. And then all of that supposedly bad experience, it actually serves you really, really well. You're going to be able to use that to help refine your approach, which is something that's going to be really helpful and very, very valuable to you. If you found this valuable, do like, subscribe, and share. And what's your experience? Do you have any questions or topic suggestions? You can contribute in the comments, on social media using hashtag bodymindself, or on jfl.com.